Welcome to Inquiring Minds, the Writing and Literacy SIG podcast. I'm Molly. We are delighted to have you join us today on Inquiring Minds as we delve into discussions relevant to the writing and literacies field.
Hi, I'm Tori, your co-host. The Writing and Literacy SIG podcast is committed to highlighting scholarly work, exploring current topics, and nurturing dialogue among members of the special interest group and the wider writing and literacies community. Our aim is to ignite discussions nationwide among faculty, graduate students, and anyone intrigued by the pertinent themes within the realms of writing, literacies, and education at large.
In this episode of Inquiring Minds, we're excited to be joined by three guests who are going to contribute to a discussion on intersectional climate justice literacies. Please welcome Dr. Julianna Lopez Kershen, Dr. Marek Oziewicz, and Dr. Lara Saguisag. Now, each guest will introduce themselves briefly. If you could just share your name, your institutional or community affiliations, and anything else you think is relevant to our discussion today. Dr. Lopez Kershen, you want to start us off?
Thank you, Molly and Tori, for inviting me to speak today and to join my colleagues in this conversation. I am an assistant professor at the University of Oklahoma and currently working in the Instructional Leadership and Academic Curriculum Department. I work with pre-service and in-service teachers primarily in literacy and English language arts education, but I also have the opportunity to teach a variety of graduate courses within our master's and doctoral programs. And I will add that as an early career scholar, it's such a pleasure for me to be in conversation with more seasoned and esteemed scholars in this field and people whose work I have looked up to and read. And so it's an exciting conversation.
So hi everyone. I'm Lara Saguisag. I'm the Georgiou Chair in Children's Literature and Literacy at New York University. I'm currently part of the Department of Teaching and Learning, but my background is in literary studies and childhood studies. I am currently working on a research project that studies like the way fossil fuels are and fossil fuel industries and infrastructures are represented in children's and young adult literature. Like Juliana, I'm just thrilled to be here for this opportunity to be in conversation with folks who are also committed to climate justice literacy. Thank you so much for welcoming me.
Yeah, thanks everyone. My name is Marek Oziewicz. It's a pleasure to be here in this group on this podcast. I'm a professor of literacy education. I'm also Margaret Henry Professor of Children's and Young Adult Literature, and I'm the director of the Center for Climate Literacy at the University of Minnesota, Twin Cities. I think I may be the oldest human being in this group, and kind of makes me think that I'm a 325 ppm human. I was born in 1970. When the world was at 0.3 Celsius global warming. And we're now in 2025 in a world of 426 ppm, almost 1.5 Celsius global heating, and a loss of decreasing ecosystems health since the year when I was born, 1970, 73% of ecosystems health lost. So I have been learning these things over the past 10, 15 years. And so gradually my research has moved into studying the role of our story systems in the Anthropocene, climate literacy, and then representations of, this current situation in children's literature and texts. And I currently serve as chair of curriculum instruction at the University of Minnesota. So it's another thing I've been doing for a while now. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for introducing yourselves. We wanted to start today by reading some quotes to ground our conversation. We are going to share two quotes from the Intersectional Environmentalist, How to Dismantle Systems of Oppression to Protect People and the Planet by Leah Thomas. The first quote is from Leah Thomas, the author and founder of the Intersectional Environmentalist. which is an organization that creates educational resources, among many other things. When educational resources tell a more diverse and holistic story of environmentalism, people feel empowered and are more prone to take action. I once thought I had to choose between advocating for my Black identity and the planet, but now I know better. Our identities flow through our politics, our advocacy, and what we care about.
And the second quote we wanted to share before we jump into our conversation comes from a co-founder of Intersectional Environmentalist, Deandra Marizette. Our ancestors are activists, and even though we sometimes feel underrepresented and alone, our histories and cultures flow through the foundations of what is now considered sustainability and have done so long before that phrasing even existed. We wanted to start with these quotes to center our conversation around the work of literacy educators, the climate crisis, and especially how identities, histories, and cultures interact in this work. But before we dig in, we think it would be helpful to ground ourselves in the question of what climate justice literacy is all about, especially for listeners who might be a little bit new to the topic. Climate literacy is often used to talk about people's generalized understanding of the mechanisms behind climate change and tends to be placed in the realm of science education. But what we're talking about here today transcends disciplinary boundaries. As scholars of reading, literature, writing, and literacy, would you please share what climate literacy or climate justice literacies means for you and your work? And perhaps we can start in the same order we did before. If you wanted to go first, Dr. Lopez Kershen.
Okay, thank you. For me, this work begins as a personal journey, really, of developing my own literacy of nature and the natural world. And it's become a way of, and continues to be a way of listening to and learning from, attending to, and really caring for the world around me, the non-human creatures, the flora, the fauna, and then the people around me, and how I can attend to those systems. So climate literacy for me is both like a simple daily experience that I want to model and live out, but also a way of interacting with others and thinking about the decisions that I make, with regards to, with regards to the materials that I bring to my classroom or the ways that I interact with those materials in the classroom as a professional. I'm a longtime gardener who learned how to garden from my grandmother as a young child. And I was privileged in having the opportunity to be able to engage in those kinds of activities. And only later, as I became a teacher and I worked in many different kinds of schools, did I have the opportunity to realize that for so many young people, a connection to the dirt, an opportunity to work on the land, even in a rural state where I come from, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are connected to the world in a way that you are building literacy of the world around you. And so I just bring those many different parts of my own experience to climate literacy, because I really think that environmental justice is a core part of climate literacy. And that means that it's really connected to the land, the food, the water, the air, the access we have around us, and the opportunities.
Yeah, so to add on to that, for me, like climate justice literacy is about recognizing how the climate crisis is an extension of or an expression of already existing forms of violence and oppression. So understanding clearly that climate change is not like kind of like a phenomenon that's existing separately, but it's very much connected to and very much exacerbated by white supremacy, patriarchy, colonialism, and imperialism. And so, as an educator who's helping students develop climate justice literacy, I often really think hard about like, okay, which narratives and perspectives do I have to amplify, right? Like whose stories do I center in my teaching? And so I'm learning as an educator to kind of like critique mainstream environmentalism that tends to center white priorities and perspectives and turning more towards indigenous knowledges and experiences of communities in the global South, like Black communities, working class communities, poor communities, and thinking about the ways that these like historically marginalized communities think about environmentalisms and sustainability, are which in practice I think is often very different from the way that we like mainstream understandings of environmentalism and sustainability. And I like also thinking about the word literacy, because often when we think about literacy, it's about like, like having the skill to read and write, because we think about like skills of reading and writing are important skills that we need to have in order to participate in society, like to exercise our rights as citizens. And so when I think about climate justice literacy, it's developing the competencies and knowledges to be able to like live in a world that's already being changed or been changed by climate change. So I and how to kind of like live in community and with others, and like in this world that's very much already impacted by this environmental crisis.
Oh wow, this was so good, Lara. And like this is I can only add to what Juliana said about this everyday knowledge, this like lived practice, and what Lara said about this larger context of who's impacted, how the present moment is a point in time of a longer arc of things that have been happening for sometimes centuries and have very specific grammar to it. What I would like to add maybe to this is that I have specifically these past few years, even before we launched the Center for Climate Literacy, I've been championing this notion of climate literacy as a distinct and different notion than, for example, environmental literacy or sustainability literacy or education, that there are strong overlaps among these different concepts, but they're not the same. So I just shared a link to an article in the journal that the center publishes. It's called Climate Literacy in Education, to an article in which offers a working definition of climate literacy. And the core of this definition is that climate literacy would be kind of everyday understanding of this polycrisis and climate emergency in which we find ourselves, that centers developing values, attitudes, and capacities aligned with how we should live on Earth now as Earthlings to safeguard the integrity and well-being and health of the planetary system, including everything that lives, human and non-human beings, in the present and for future generations. So this is something that this broader, more holistic notion of climate literacy only developed over the past 10 years, because when NOAA initially coined this term climate literacy, it was a synonym for climate science literacy. So it was the kind of knowledge and competence that is very narrow for a very specific group. And it's also highly hierarchical. It's structured. So there will be maybe basic things that seventh graders can learn, but then there is more abstract knowledge that only scientists, graduate students will know. So it has this sort of academic, very narrow structure to it. But it's like really like with using, our smartphones. Like everyone uses a smartphone, but how many of us actually know how the apps work, how the tech works, what goes into, battery life? I mean, we don't know any of these things. What we need to have is this functional everyday knowledge of how to use a smartphone for whatever functions we need it for, including conventions that, for example, you don't use a smartphone on a bus or something, you don't talk loud, those kinds of things. So climate literacy is this kind of general everyday knowledge that should be available to anyone, including children, in today's world. And I also want to say, so that's climate literacy. And I want to say that climate literacy is very overlaps, but is different than the concept of climate justice. That climate justice is climate justice refers to consideration of climate change vulnerabilities versus responsibilities. And this is something that climate justice is also a notion that really came into focus only over the past few years. And it's really a lens for dialing in, like, when you take pictures and something is not sharp, you kind of see it, but it's not sharp. So climate justice is the kind of lens that allows us to zoom in to get the sharp picture of what the problem and challenge is. And then it's also a kind of framing to envision solutions. And I could talk a lot more about climate justice, but I will probably stop here.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much for sharing your ideas about how to define climate justice and climate literacies, and how the histories, experiences, and everyday interactions among people and materials are impacted, and how these intersections of race, class, culture, and other marginalized identities are represented in classrooms and conversations about climate justice. So as we're extending this conversation and thinking more about intersectionality, we now ask, what role do identities, histories, and cultures play in addressing the climate crisis?
Okay, well, I'll jump in first with maybe a short answer that I will invite others to build on. I think that for many of, so I really, when you shared this question with me, I thought about it quite a bit in terms of the teachers that I work with and the young people that I have the opportunity to be in community with in classrooms. And in a lot of those spaces, youth especially deeply care about these issues. They want to be involved. They want to understand and to inquire and define the questions that they think that are actionable for them. At the same time, I think that teachers often feel like classrooms are precarious spaces to do this work, and that some of that precarity is created by what this question is asking, right? Because this question is saying that there are multiple perspectives, that it is not simply data visualization in a science room. It enters into the stories that we tell about where we come from, and the extent to which our stories are a part of the larger stories of a community, of a region, of a state. And so I think that I often find that when I'm talking with young people, there are no other ways but to bring those nuances and the intersectionality into our conversations. At the same time, I recognize that this is very challenging for classroom teachers to embrace. And I do think that literature is a powerful way of bridging that chasm, because it creates a safe opportunity and a shared opportunity for us to start to investigate the identities that each of us brings, or the histories, especially that have been elided or omitted. And also just recognizing in each of our communities, there are underserved people who want to be a part of working towards solutions and want to be a part of addressing climate crisis.
I guess when I think about this question, the first thing that comes to mind is like, thinking about like identities, histories, and cultures. I'm thinking about part of addressing the climate crisis is really first recognizing and addressing others, like other social inequities. And I think like given just like all the kind of like the climate disasters that we've witnessed over the past few months, it's kind of like an indication that all of us will be impacted or are being impacted by the climate crisis. But climate justice literacy also asks us to recognize that we're not being impacted in the same way. Some of us have privileges that allow us to kind of like, escape or, like, go elsewhere when a particular region or area is being impacted by climate change, or we have the resources to kind of like get us back on our feet if we are hit by disasters, and not everybody has that capacity, and like and I'm thinking about like, I guess like that recognition of these particular privileges is also important when we're thinking about like climate activism, because I think there are particular folks whose identities make it a little bit harder for them to take climate action, because they are more likely to be harassed. They're more likely to be like assaulted. They're more likely to be disappeared or murdered for taking action. And I keep thinking about like those of us who can recognize our privileges. I wonder, like, like confront thinking about this question should make us think about like, okay, how can we use this privilege to help and support marginalized communities who are the ones who are disproportionately being impacted by climate change. And I think like thinking about the idea of histories, I think thinking about how histories play a role in addressing the climate crisis, it can be, maybe empowering is the wrong word, but I keep thinking about like all the stories of resistance, native resistance to dispossession and displacement and genocide, like resistance during the civil rights movement, like resistance of laborers through union organizing. I mean, I think we can turn to all these histories um, to kind of like, I guess like give us hope and think about like, yes, we can resist like all these infrastructures and systems that are leading to the climate crisis. So I think it's reminding ourselves like, and I think about this because I feel like when we fall into despair and think about like, oh, there's no way we can address this massive crisis, I think just thinking about like there have been long like these like histories of struggle and resistance, that we can turn to kind of like ground us and give us our bearings when we kind of like feel lost in climate grief and climate anxiety.
Yes. Okay, Lara, what you just said about these histories makes me think of Amitav Ghosh's The Nutmeg Curse, in which he talks about that. It's a quote amounting to something like that. Oh, this present moment where we're in is basically an extension of the logic of colonialism and expansion and extractivism that was put in motion by European colonization of the world. And so it goes back 400 years. So we're at this point, but we're also at the point where this logic has unfortunately been adopted by governments and elites across the world. So it's not necessarily a Western drive or Western industrial civilization. It's a kind of global thing at this point, and so we have to contend with it. We have to consider what we can do given all of this massive history that brought us to where we are today, and including our complicity. And of course, this complicity in the system is different for different people. Young people are complicit in a different way than their parents or grandparents. People in the global south are complicit in a different way. So it's an extremely complex picture. But the point is that, of course, identities, cultures, and histories are super important here because there was this TED talk about the danger of a single story. Uh, uh, Adichie, right? Was she talked about the danger of the single story. So I think that when we as a global civilization, we are at this point locked in a single story of this is the way we move forward. And this is a story it's a kind of dominant cultural narrative that has all of these, it has political elements, economic elements, legal structure, everything, the entire architecture was built around the story of, I don't know, progress, science, moving forward, markets always growing, externalities, we don't look at these things. So the dominant story in which we're locked is tells us, reinforces this notion that we human beings are above, separate and above from nature, that certain groups of people are more important than other groups of people, that there are things that matter like money and progress versus things that matter less like nature and environmentalism and like oceans or whatever. So really at the core, I think the problem is that we operate on a wrong story. And it makes me think of Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass when she opens with the story of a sky woman. And she compares it to the Western biblical story of Eve, stories of two women, but with very different implications. And she talks about stories as life instructions or operating instructions. So I really think that we need a new story of who we are as a species on this planet today, who we are in relation to other forms of life. Um, and this is something that that different cultures, especially indigenous cultures, can offer amazing tools today for us to break this monopoly of this dominant story so that we can start thinking about ourselves as nature, not outside of nature, that we can start prioritizing care and inclusion rather than competition and exclusion. So there's a number of elements in this new story. And of course, so cultures and groups, especially people of color, indigenous groups, cultures that have been marginalized outside of the mainstream, but they were able to keep part of their living traditions of what it means to be a good earthling. That these groups, these cultures, they bring the kind of lessons that we can really use today. And so in a very fundamental way, it really starts with stories, then stories become dreams, then these dreams become work, and then work becomes reality. So that's how we change the world.
Thank you both so much for your thoughts. We've heard about literature as a safe way to enter into conversations about climate and intersectionality in classrooms, about the power of stories and histories of past resistance that give us strength in acts of resistance today, and about how persistent narratives story progress and how we can story ourselves as humans differently. All three of you ground your work in literature, whether it's adult, young adult, or children's literature, in a variety of genres, including fictional genres like science fiction and speculative fiction. Could we all speak a little bit more about the potential of literature and stories and storytelling for contending with the climate crisis in literacy, teaching, and learning?
I have it's a pretty short answer, but I like to think about stories about climate justice as possibly serving as immunization against climate denial and climate refusal, because they are stories that document what is going on, right? Like give us a picture and give us the narrative of a world that is in climate crisis. But I also think about, it's not just like the story itself, but like the act of reading. When we're in the classroom, we often try to teach our students to read closely, right? To read carefully, to analyze, to make connections between texts. And I think these are acts that actually are asking students to pay attention to the details. And I think that kind of skill of paying attention, of analysis, is very important to understanding climate change, and to see like and to, I guess like to also it's seeing these details like that allow us to also kind of like understand our connection with our environments, and I think it's that practice of reading, of careful reading, that is also very essential to us to develop climate justice literacy.
Laura, I'm so grateful that you brought up the issue of attention because that's something that I think is intricately woven together with climate literacy is the ability to develop and honestly improve our attention spans. That there's so many things in the world now, especially screen-based technologies like the ones we're using now, that I think that are negatively contributing to our attention span and our capacity to engage intimately with one another. So while on the one hand, it's allowing us to have this powerful conversation across many spaces and time zones, um, it is also or these kinds of technologies are also used in classrooms where children are sitting next to one another, but yet not engaged with one another, or students are, have the opportunity to be outside in the world and they're looking at their phone instead of listening or attending to what's happening outside, just around them while they're walking from place to place or building to building or class to class or on the playground or all kinds of, local environments that they know, the places and spaces that they live in. And I feel like the literature that I love, that I like to write about, and that I think is empowering for climate literacy, are stories that are capable of bringing together the everyday nuance that draw attention to the little changes that the characters observe, that they are witness to, that they are involved in, while also opening readers up to a much larger narrative that can connect them out into the world and into larger stories, and thus then giving them those spaces to ask, why is this the way that it is? How can I understand the complexity of these things? So again, thinking about where I live, where so many, so many families rely on oil industry and petroleum industry for their livelihood, for their jobs, and for generations. And so for us to build bridges into those communities to understand and respect that climate literacy has to include all of these different kinds of people who are trying to understand how we can live in this finite place together and honor that we're going to come in from different places. I want to find literature that has that nuance while also invites the reader in to ask these big questions, that can take them out of their place and into a larger world. And attention is connected to that because I can, if I go for enough walks, I can start to notice that birdsong is earlier. Or if I go for enough walks, I can realize that because it's getting warmer sooner in the year, trees are budding, and then we have these hard frosts that then stunt those new buds that wouldn't have happened before. But I need to be able to build my attention to do that.
Yeah, Juliana, this is such an excellent point. Thank you. So yeah, that's my experience is too, that reading, close reading of literary text, which could also be films, it could also be games, like talking about different narrative formats, picture books, when students have the opportunity to discuss the textual narrative versus visual narrative, which sometimes work together, sometimes work not so much in alignment. They can show two different stories. So this is absolutely crucial. And I would like to add one other element is that a lot of these concepts around the climate emergency are either massive, massive. They're just beyond human grasp, or they're so complex. Usually it's both massive and complex that we just don't have like an entry point to understand it. And what texts and narratives do, they help us anchor very specific concepts. I don't know, energy transition, carbon budget, global warming, wildfire. These are, for many people, these are completely abstract concepts. Unless you have experienced anything like that yourself, it's really very abstract. So what stories do, they open up these concepts, and the entire story, the entire narrative can be based, it's usually a number of concepts. But when you think about, let's say, even this very old film now, Monsters, Inc. So I've been assigning Monsters, Inc. to my students. Okay, watch it again. And they know, my 20-something-year-old students, they know this film when they were like 2 or 3. They watched it way back. And I asked them, okay, watch it again as a film about energy transition. And they come back, I say, my gosh, there's so much there. And they name these concepts, they name the forces, who does what their externalities are. So stories are a brilliant way to anchor these complex concepts in they make this understanding personal. Then you can say, oh, I get it. When I think about fracking, I don't understand fracking from, I don't know, policy briefs or news. I understand what fracking means and what it involves from Nicole Helget's The End of the Wild, which is a middle grade novel that unpacks the impacts of fracking as an opportunity, but also as a threat to this impoverished Kentucky community. And you see all those nuances. It just really makes it very specific. So this is the job of narratives, to make. So it, of course, requires our attention, it requires our focus, but it also helps us decode certain concepts which otherwise would be removed from us emotionally also. That even though you hear about it, you hear 317 ppm versus 420, like, I don't care. Like, what does it matter to me? These numbers mean nothing to me. So a lot of discussion about and around the climate emergency, different aspects, loss of biodiversity, like most people do not experience it personally. And if you experience a very narrow sliver of the much larger process. So narratives help us go beyond our own personal experience, and they give us a wider, bigger perspective on these issues. So, and of course, let me just one last thing, that narratives are, because stories are our oldest technology. The stories are our kind of our operating system, that we live in language and in stories, the way we live in our bodies. We move from ignorance to understanding, the way we move physically from place to place in our bodies. We grasp things, with language. And the notion of grasping is also very physical. So because of that, because this technology called story is so complex, it has this double function of being descriptive. So it's sort of, it paints a picture of the world for us, but it's also, it has this aspect of envisioning, projecting, imagining. So stories not only help us understand where we are, what's going on, aspects of it, but also help us get more clarity about where do we want to go, what we want to create, what is this future that we want to have. And so the role of stories here, especially with young people, so children's literature, incredibly important. And that's this whole idea lies at the heart of the work of the Center for Climate Literacy, which we created in 2022, and with the mission to elevate, to leverage children's literature as a tool in schools everywhere for conversations about these topics.
Wow. I love that stories are our oldest technology. I'm going to write that quote on my wall. Okay, so you all have made some connections to literacy and how the acts of reading across modes through stories, walks, movies, games, how reading these stories closely with attention has intricately related lessons to connecting with others, and the world, and how asking questions of these stories, both small and large, can help readers connect with ideas that are sometimes very complex and abstract. So, because we do have some listeners who are practicing teachers, we'd like to take a moment to think about how young people, young children and adolescents, when teaching, there's a lot of concern about climate anxiety, and there's also a space for conversations about hope for the future. So, what advice do you have for teachers who are engaging in climate justice literacies work while balancing the seriousness and urgency of the climate crisis with climate hope?
Okay, can I start now? I would like in one sentence, I would recommend checking the website of the Center for Climate Literacy. We build resources. All of these resources are open access, and Lara was super instrumental in launching this entire process a few years back. So I just shared two links. One is to the center's page, and the other is to our literature database, which is called Climate Lit. And climatelit.org it's a database of different formats of narratives that teachers can use for climate literacy education. And so you can search by title, by keywords, by concept, by author, by grade level. And then it's a sort of, database / encyclopedia with entries where our team, which is now international, about 60 people, I think, are working on this now, creates these recommendations where you have a description of like a summary of the plot, but also a paragraph which says, here's what we think you can do with this in the classroom. You can use this book for, talking about water circulation, or you can use this book to talk about kinship with the non-human world. And so all of these, so that's just one thing we do, but we do trainings. We just heard on Friday, and today is Friday, so a week ago, we heard that our NEH grant on using children's literature to teach climate justice was canceled as part of the savings of the federal government, which is brilliant. So this was canceled, and it's not important, apparently, for young people to learn about these things. We disagree. So we will try to do as many alternatives programmings as we can, but we're committed to this work because we don't believe that any administrative decision can cancel the climate emergency. I wish it was the case, but unfortunately, this is the world in which we live. We will have to contend with all of the challenges that this emergency throws at us, including also financial disruption, probably. Like, how much can we pay for hurricanes, floods, wildfires? And we know that the price or the cost of these things is skyrocketing from year to year. So there will come a time when even the powerful financial institutions in our country, which largely profit from doubling down on this extractive economy, that they will also feel the price of not taking steps to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So this database and the work of the center kind of lays the ground for a time when all schools, all states, all school districts, all teachers will need the tools to teach about where we are and how we transition to a just, sustainable, regenerative, ecological civilization. And we believe that children's literature, we have so many brilliant, brilliant books that can be used for this work. So that's my first advice. Like, check out the websites and wonderful resources, and we have many opportunities for teachers to be involved, including an open access journal where teachers publish their own lesson plans, their own reflections. So it's whatever we can do to support teachers in this world. That's what we're doing.
No, thanks for that, Marek. And it's I'll just second the plug for these sites because they are such wonderful, robust resources. Um, for me, like the advice that I would offer, and I know this can come with like it's not easy, right? But I think like just starting by acknowledging feelings of anxiety and grief and despair is important. Maybe sharing, the educator can also share with their students, right, their own worries. I think just acknowledging that is crucial rather than just like sweeping it under the rug. And perhaps to also kind of like help alleviate such feelings of anxiety. I just want to return to my earlier point that we can provide like our students like examples of like these stories of resistance, and just to, I guess, like part of it too is also to kind of show how um this like such stories of resistance don't always kind of like result in like this obvious like victory. Like that there are these cycles, and these kinds of like kind of like there are these wins and losses, and I think it's kind of like understanding that like struggle often is part of the commitment, kind of like to justice. um so again, just like providing stories not just about climate justice, but like stories of native resistance, of African American resistance, of labor organizing, of immigrants, like asserting their rights. I think these are important stories, and ways stories that can also again help students um, connect like the climate crisis to other forms of oppression. Um, and I think another suggestion that I would have, if like schools have these resources, is to invite like community organizations who are like active in like environmental justice and climate justice work, to tell their stories, because I often like I have met, like I live in Philadelphia and have like met some community members here who are very active in like climate justice organizations. And it's like it's just amazing the kind of work that they do, even in the face of kind of like the worst kind of like like political repression. They keep like fighting. They don't lose hope. And they find ways to like stay the course. And I think part of it is like having students kind of like meet like organizers. I feel like activists and organizers can also make students see how important it is to be part of a community, that it's not something like addressing the climate crisis is not something we do as individuals. It has to be a collective effort. Yeah, so those are my suggestions.
I'll build on those excellent suggestions by saying once you've, gone on to, once teachers have experimented with the climate lit library and have dug into those resources and found some that resonate with them and that they think they can take to their classroom, when they have started to build partnerships out into the community, I would add that I think that empowering your students to work intergenerationally is amazing. And so whether that means that your high school students are going to the elementary school and reading some of those picture books to kindergartners and first graders and having those kinds of conversations from, a 16-year-old to a 6-year-old, and they're being the teachers, they're leading the work, that is powerful. I think taking middle school students, right, and connecting them with elders in their community, whether they're visiting, a full circle adult day space, whether they're spending time, with grandparents or with older neighbors, like getting those people to tell their stories, and for those, fifth graders, eighth graders to record those stories and to listen for the stories of the land, for the stories of how others have cared for the world around them in different ways, or how where you come from shapes who you are, then you start to come to see yourself as someone who matters in this conversation, as someone who can have power in this conversation. And I think that if there's one thing that teachers can give their students is we can hand our students over the power, right, to be the decision makers of their lives. And I think that when they are given the opportunities to do that, then they're going to participate in these big questions, right? Because everyone wants to have a voice. Everyone wants to be an active part of a community. Everyone wants to matter, right? And I think that everyone wants to care about the world around them. And so we need the stories, we need the resources, we need the books of all kinds. We need the films. The music. I think music is really powerful, and there's a lot of good music that we can use. We need the wisdom of the activists in our communities, and to find them, there may be someone working at your city water board, who's really active and thinking about stormwater reclamation, and it could be an issue in your community. It is in mine, right? With flooding. And so, how do we work? How do we bring those people forward? And then also connecting students intergenerationally, I think is so important. And teachers can do that to capture the stories of our places.
Thank you all so much for the resources that you've shared, the books that you've mentioned, the ideas and the words of encouragement that you've offered to teachers who are out here doing the work. We're taking copious notes, and we will share all of this with our listeners. So before we wrap up, we have this lovely opportunity to be in community together. And we know you may have some questions that we didn't pose. So we wanted to open the floor in case there was a question that any of you would like to pose to the group or something you'd like to talk more about.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear from teachers or you guys in terms of what are some of the best strategies to organize communally. Because one challenge that I've been seeing off and on is that in many cases, teachers try to do this work alone, and they feel isolated, they feel that it's too much, and they struggle to find, to build a network, to find others who are doing similar work where they can do it together, support one another, share resources. So I would be very much interested to hear any suggestions about groups, organizations, SIGs, that focus on this work and try to advance it.
Well, frustratingly, I feel like, Marek, your summer program through the NEH was going to be that kind of an opportunity for teachers, that it was going to build community such that they would go back home to where their schools and spread that, spread their experiences, and through that shared experience, build one another's confidence. And so this is something I also struggle with, is finding ways to connect teachers. And I think that part of it is that the grammar of schooling is to be isolated and, to work in your own classroom with your students. And then, how do we move out of those spaces to make our work more public? It's very challenging.
It sounds like partnering with local community initiatives would be a really powerful way for teachers to connect and do the work beyond the classroom. Um, that was just a thought I had while you all were speaking about the different initiatives.
It may be that as schools reckon with their own, like as districts have to reckon with the economic decisions of climate costs, then there are opportunities in thinking about, alternative ways of creating schools such that these conversations become less, I don't know, less siloed and more integrated. Like I think about schools that I've heard that have utilized, are utilizing more renewable energies and renewable energy sources. Schools who are, involved in, improving their own infrastructure, like whole districts, improving infrastructure so that they're better prepared, for storms, for example. And how do those decisions get translated to stakeholders in a way that actually communicates climate literacy? Like that was a part of our decision versus this was just the most, if, fiscally efficient decision.
I'm responding to your question, Marek, and thinking about like the isolation is perhaps is only being exacerbated by attacks on DEI, right? And book bans and censorship. Because now we are no longer allowed even, I think, to say the word climate justice or environmental justice in certain spaces. Because it's considered DEI and dangerous, right? It's woke. So I wonder whether that the kind of the it just further like it might just further discourage educators from engaging in with this material because it can pose like dangers to their livelihoods and in their lives. So I feel like I feel like part of the kind of like building communities and organizing, I think is making that connection between like the efforts to censor materials in our classrooms. That is very much related to climate justice literacy work. But it also means to those of us, like outside of like educational spaces, like you use what we have to kind of like support our teachers and our librarians. Like run for a school board and run for like like the library boards and just kind of like find ways to kind of like support this kind of work.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. And I just wanted to add that even though in most conversations we have about this situation, and of course exacerbated by what's happening in the White House now, I do think that we are already in the period where the opportunity to transform the emergency into an emergence is stronger than it was before. That, even during the Biden presidency and these past, I don't know, 20 years or something, uh, even with Democratic leadership and presidents acknowledging, yeah, okay, there is this climate emergency. Yeah, it's serious. We should do something about it. The system was very stable. So even though it was verbally acknowledged, we need to do something, very little, very, very little was actually happening. And then you have this other political party where the current line is like, no, this thing doesn't exist. We shouldn't be doing anything about it because it's not real. So I'm thinking that because you cannot change reality in that fundamental sense, saying that something doesn't exist and it will disappear. This is like classical case of wishful thinking, magical thinking. So this reality of more frequent storms, hurricanes, wildfires, damage to property, loss of lives, heat waves, this will continue and this will grow over the we don't know how long. But I think that this reality will create an even more urgent sense, this like awakening to reality that, oh, we need to address it because the Earth system is not a political entity. It's a biochemical living entity, and it is reacting to the impacts of human civilization. So what I believe that I see it as a very positive silver lining of even the current situation, that we have now an opportunity to imagine and design a very different system. And maybe this current situation is the best opportunity to let go of this degenerative, extractive, extremely destructive system in which we have lived so far. And maybe this system is on its last legs. And maybe we will be forced to transition while we still can, by imagining a kind of a different system, that protects and safeguards life everywhere, in non-human ecosystems, in human societies, and we create a world in which we address the climate emergency, in which we create a just transition, in which we create this inclusive, regenerative civilization that we all want to see. So I do see that there is an opportunity, and I remain hopeful despite everything that I will see it. I want to be part of it, and the sense of excitement that we can do it. If schools and teachers are able to embrace it, imagine the power of excitement and drive this could create in states and nationwide. So that's still a choice we have, regardless of what's happening in the political space. And I believe that we still have a lot of opportunities to actually create this world. A world without billionaires, a world with access to clean water, a world with national parks that are not privatized, all of those things. And it's not that difficult. I've had conversations with my students, freshmen, students, and when you ask them, what is it that you would like to see? They are pretty clear about the kind of world they would like to live, the kind of world that they are willing to fight for, willing to work for. So maybe it's not that complicated as it looks, but of course it's not easy.
Thank you all so much. We've heard about how climate literacy and justice are intersectional pursuits, and how multiple perspectives can be brought together in conversation with youth through literature, storytelling, teaching, and reading and writing. And we've heard about how these issues of climate justice are entangled with power and oppression, and how we can tell a new story to restore the balance of marginalized groups. We really appreciate the time of these scholars and their contributions to our understanding of climate justice literacies. Thank you so much for joining us today for this episode of Inquiring Minds podcast, focused on intersectional climate justice literacies. And a big thank you to our participants for engaging and delightful conversation. We have thoroughly enjoyed hearing from these amazing scholars, and we know that our listeners will as well.
Thank you.
We wanted to end today with one last quote from Leah Thomas. She said that it's truly my hope that one day in the future, we won't need to preface environmentalism with intersectional. We won't need to create a separate safe space where curriculums seek to be inclusive. One day, we hope that when people think about an environmentalist, they automatically think of someone who cares deeply about both people and the planet. I hope that one day environmental programs will reflect all the world's people and their stories. So thank you all so much for being here today, for caring deeply about people and the planet, and for uplifting your own stories and the stories of others, both past and present.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.